tonight. A hurricane turned tropical
destroyed and civilians being killed.
Major funding for the PBS NewsHour has been provided by
A law partner rediscovers her grandmother's artistry and creates a trust to keep the craft alive. A Raymond James financial advisor gets to know you, your passions, and the way you enrich your community. Life well planned.
On an American Cruise Line's journey along the legendary Mississippi River, travelers explore Civil War battlefields and historic riverside towns. Aboard our fleet of American riverboats, you can experience local culture and cuisine and discover the music and history of the mighty Mississippi. American Cruise Lines, proud sponsor of PBS NewsHour.
Carnegie Corporation of New York, working to reduce political polarization through philanthropic support for education, democracy, and peace. More information at carnegie.org. And with the ongoing support of these individuals and institutions. This program was made possible by the Corporation for Public Broadcasting and by contributions to your PBS station from viewers like you. Thank you.
Welcome to the NewsHour. The major storm Francine dumped heavy rain along the southeast today after flooding New Orleans and coastal communities throughout Louisiana.
Francine peaked as a Category 2 hurricane and knocked out power for hundreds of thousands of people. It weakened into what's known as a post-tropical cyclone today. And there have been no reports of deaths or injuries, but there were dozens of rescues. Stephanie Sy has our report.
Hurricane Francine crashed into land last night, drenching Louisiana and sending trees down to earth. From the streets of Baton Rouge to a family home in Denham Springs, the Category 2 storm blew winds up to 100 miles per hour.
A lot of wind, a lot of water, a lot of loss of power.
Senator John Kennedy appeared alongside Louisiana Governor Jeff Landry as he briefed reporters this afternoon.
As we begin this recovery, let us care for those family members and our neighbors, check on them, make sure that they are secure, because that is who we are here in Louisiana.
Closer to the Gulf in Houma, Louisiana, flooding blurred the lines between land and sea. In New Orleans, authorities said 52 floodgates were closed to protect against a storm surge. The Federal Emergency Management Agency's leader, Deanne Criswell, was on the ground to inspect the damage. She said the state's flood protection infrastructure paid off.
The amount of money invested in resilience has really made a difference, from the power outages to the number of homes saved.
In Morgan City, Francine ripped roots from the ground. Governor Landry said at the storm's peak, 450,000 people were without power.
At first, it wasn't bad at all. But once the winds pick up and the rain started it got a little rough, especially with two little kids inside. They went to crying, they went to screaming. I was like, oh man, grab them.
Today, residents surveyed the damage and started cleaning up the mess.
I'm gonna ride around, see who need help. That's what you kind of doing things like this, help the elder, help the young folks, help anybody out.
Francine weakened into a tropical depression as it moved through Mississippi today. It will continue to lose steam as it approaches Arkansas, Missouri, and Tennessee. For the PBS NewsHour, I'm Stephanie Sy.
With just over 7 weeks until Election Day, both candidates fought for votes in battleground states. Vice President Kamala Harris's campaign said today it raised $47 million in the 24 hours following Tuesday night's debate. At a rally in Charlotte, North Carolina, Harris used former President Donald Trump's debate performance to compare their visions for the country.
On Tuesday night, I talked about issues that I know matter to families across America. But that's not what we heard from Donald Trump. Instead, it was the same old show. That same tired playbook that we've heard for years.
Mr. Trump said today that Tuesday's matchup would be their last, writing on Truth Social that there will be no third debate. He later held a rally in Tucson, Arizona.
As everyone saw 2 nights ago, we had a monumental victory over Comrade Kamala Harris. Meanwhile, Kamala Harris showed up spewing empty rhetoric, the same old lies, meaningless platitudes, offering no plans, no policies, and no details whatsoever, nothing.
Meantime, today, the Georgia judge handling Donald Trump's election interference case dismissed 2 counts brought against the former president. Judge Scott McAfee ruled that state prosecutors lacked the authority to pursue the charges in federal court, but he declined an effort to dismiss the entire indictment. The day's other headlines begin in Ukraine, where Russian strikes killed 3 members of the Red Cross. Ukrainian officials say the workers were hit while unloading an aid truck. In the northern part of the country, police surveyed the damage by Russian drone strikes on an apartment building. Authorities say 14 people were injured. Secretary of State Antony Blinken in Poland today addressed the growing calls to allow Ukraine to use Western weapons for deeper strikes inside Russia. He left open that possibility.
As we go forward, we will do exactly what we have already done, which is we will adjust, we'll adapt as necessary, including with regard to the means that are at Ukraine's disposal to effectively defend against the Russian aggression.
It all comes as Ukrainian President Volodymyr Zelensky says Russia has started a counteroffensive in the Kursk border region, pushing back after Ukraine carried out a surprise incursion last month. Russia said it recaptured 10 settlements today. In North Dakota, a judge has struck down the state's ban on abortion, saying the law was too vague and the state's constitution enshrines the right to access an abortion before a fetus is viable. Although today's ruling makes abortion legal in the state, North Dakota currently has no clinics performing them. The ruling is expected to be appealed. The Biden administration slapped sanctions on 16 allies of Venezuelan President Nicolas Maduro today. They include the head of the country's high court, who reaffirmed Maduro's illegitimate claim of victory in that country's disputed July election, and military leaders, intelligence officials, and government officers who the U.S. says are responsible for intensifying repression through intimidation, indiscriminate detentions, and censorship. Edmundo Gonzalez, who the U.S. says won the election this week, fled into exile after being granted asylum in Spain. In a rare move today, U.S. Attorney General Merrick Garland denounced efforts to politicize the Justice Department with the election less than 2 months away. His remarks before DOJ employees didn't mention any specific cases or names, but they come amid claims from Donald Trump and his allies that the DOJ has been weaponized to keep the former president from being reelected.
The work you do every day makes a difference. And the way you do that work makes clear that the public servants of the Department of Justice do not bend to politics and that they will not break under pressure.
Garland went on to say that the norms protecting the department from political interference matter now more than ever. And to economic news, there's new Labor Department data showing the job market and inflation are steadily slowing. Jobless claims were up by 2,000 last week to a total of 230,000. That's up from earlier this year, but layoffs remain historically low. Separate numbers indicate that wholesale prices only rose by a fraction of a percent last month. And in what could be a precursor to the Federal Reserve cutting interest rates, the European Central Bank today made its own rate cut of 1/4 point, its second cut of the year. That news helped stocks rise across the board today. The Dow Jones Industrial Average gained over 235 points, inching back closer to its all-time high. The Nasdaq jumped by an entire percentage point, and the S&P finished higher for its 4th straight day. And hundreds of miles above Earth today, one giant leap for commercial space travel. A tech billionaire who chartered his own SpaceX flight became the first ever private citizen to perform a spacewalk.
I have a feeling the crowd is about to go wild.
The company live-streamed the moment that Jared Isaacman hoisted himself out of the capsule, spending around 10 minutes in the vacuum of space, connected by a tether. The spacewalk was just one small step toward possibly settling on Mars and other planets. Still to come on the NewsHour, we lay out the presidential candidates' divergent positions on immigration. The bankruptcy of a large health system gets political. And a group of urban explorers in Gary, Indiana find beauty in the decay of an abandoned buildings.
This is the PBS NewsHour from WETA Studios in Washington and in the West from the Walter Cronkite School of Journalism at Arizona State University.
In a new letter, election officials from across the country say the U.S. Postmaster General has not addressed persistent mail delivery delays and has not adequately prepared for the general election. And that, they say, could cause ballots to miss election deadlines, lead to fewer people voting, and undermine trust in the voting process. Mail-in voting has already started in Alabama, and at least 36 states allow all of their residents to vote by mail. I spoke earlier today with Mandy Vigil. She's elections director for the state of New Mexico and president of the National Association of State Election Directors, one of the groups that issued the letter. And I asked about what election officials see as the lack of understanding and enforcement of Postal Service policies for handling election mail.
The USPS has a lot of different election mail policies. Those policies are in place for good reason. And the unfortunate reality is that we're seeing an inconsistent application of those policies, which could make a difference in the ability to count a ballot or not. So as an example, there's a requirement to postmark ballots. We are hearing of instances across states where that is not occurring. And depending on state law, that may prohibit an eligible ballot from otherwise being counted.
We know that critical battleground states like Pennsylvania, Wisconsin, Nevada, Georgia, they all accept mail-in ballots. All of these states will likely to be decided by extremely thin margins. Do you think that these delivery delays could swing the outcome of the election in any one of these states?
I think that's something that we are concerned about. I mean, to your point, this is an incredibly historic election. Voters do have many ways in which they can participate, and that might vary depending on what state they're in. But many states, including one like ours in New Mexico, offer an opportunity for voters to participate by mail. And so voters should have that opportunity without concern that something isn't going to get there in time to be counted. So, we do see contests that when we're looking at a local level could be determined by small margins. We see changes when it's 100 to 200 ballots. I've even seen contests where there's a tie in our state when we get down to the local level. So every ballot is something that we want to feel confident in being able to account for and count appropriately.
Well, I reached out to the U.S. Postal Service yesterday to see how they responded to this letter. And they say that they're aware of your concerns. They say that mail is typically delivered in less than 3 days across the country. They say they don't believe there'd be any critical election issues resulting from their handling of ballot mail. And the director of election mail issued a statement that reads this way. It says, "We are ready to deliver. We were successful in 2020, delivering a historic volume of mail-in ballots, also in 2022, and will do so again in November 2024. Have they done enough to address your concerns?
No. That's really the reason that we felt it was critical to come together as an election community. This is coming from state down to local election administrators. So we see these issues across states, across kind of government levels, and we don't see the change that makes us feel confident in their ability to really address what's necessary for election mail. It's not about volume. It's really about reliability and accuracy. So if we look at their busiest time of year where they're able to handle holiday Christmas mail, if a Christmas card gets to your friends and family a little bit beyond the deadline, though it might be a little embarrassing, I think that nobody really is really worried about it in the same way when we apply that to a ballot. So if we are following kind of their standards and expectations of when a voter should receive and then the timeline in which they should return a ballot. But that's not accurate. We are hearing about ballots coming in, weeks, days. That is critical to being able to count them. Many states, it has to either arrive on election night by 7 p.m., like ours here in New Mexico, or they may have a postmark requirement. So either way, the post office is a critical partner in making sure that all of those items are aligned and that the voters can trust that it's going to get to us timely. If it doesn't, that's really where election officials and voters are the ones left paying the price.
The Postmaster General, Louis DeJoy, his history as a Trump supporter, a Trump mega donor, that has raised questions for some about his motives as the Postal Service sees these slowdowns, these delivery delays. Is there any reason to think that these slowdowns are intentional, as some Trump critics have suggested?
I don't think that election administrators as a whole see things in a partisan way. We're not elected officials, we're election administrators. So we have seen issues with the post office in the past. I think what we can speak to is the fact that it's certainly something that has increased over the past 12 months, and we certainly don't feel like we're seeing any effort to really make a difference on the pattern across kind of the post office as a whole. Many states may have positive relationships with their state and local or regional support in the post office, but that's really just not enough to be able to see kind of the industry adjustments necessary to change this pattern.
Mandy Vigil, president of the National Association of State Election Directors. Thanks so much for your time.
Thank you.
One of the most divisive issues in this year's presidential race is immigration. And on the campaign trail, Vice President Kamala Harris and former President Donald Trump have clashed over how to handle immigration policy. While federal agents reported nearly 2.5 million migrant encounters at the southern border last year, in the last 5 months, crossings have plunged. Our Lisa Desjardins has been covering both candidates' plans. She joins us now. Good to see you, Lisa.
Good to see you.
Let's start with the border and border security specifically. What do we hear from each campaign in terms of how they would handle this issue?
Both Trump and Harris have talked about border security, and in office, both of them have actually increased border security. But from there, that's where things diverge. So let's take a look first at Vice President Kamala Harris and what she wants to do. She has pointed to a particular Senate bill proposal for what she thinks needs to happen on the border as far as security goes. Here's what she said in the debate.
The United States Congress, including some of the most conservative members of the United States Senate, came up with a border security bill, which I supported. And that bill would have put 1,500 more border agents on the border to help those folks who are working there right now overtime, trying to do their job.
On border security, that means 1,500 Customs and Border Patrol agents, but also hundreds of asylum and other new officers. She also would like to invest in more detection technology, specifically to catch fentanyl smuggled in. Now, that bill, of course, Amna, is the one that former President Trump personally killed, even though it was getting some bipartisan support. So what would he do as far as border security is concerned? Let's take a look at the side-by-side here. He is not proposing to increase the number of border agents, asylum officers, or other personnel. Instead, he is pledging and stressing that he wants to finish his border wall. Now, Trump's approach to border security is much more about deportation and deterrence than about the actual physical barriers right now at the border.
So tell us more about that. What are we hearing from the candidates in terms of how they want to handle both migrants who are now attempting to cross the border and also the millions who are already here as undocumented immigrants?
That's right. Let's, in this case, start now with former President Trump, because this is a central part of what he is saying and a central part of the debate, of course. Former President Trump is centered around the idea of having mass deportations, the largest in history in this country, of millions of undocumented immigrants. He says this would be done by local police, the National Guard, and possibly by active duty military, with the possibility of increasing detention centers to hold these individuals. Now, at the debate, Mr. Trump gave his rationale and raised an unproven, debunked idea that Democrats have caused a border crisis to get votes.
This will be one of the greatest mistakes in history for them to allow, and I think they probably did it because they think they're going to get votes, but it's not worth it because they're destroying the fabric of our country by what they've done. There's never been anything done like this at all. They've destroyed the fabric of our country.
Now, it is not legal, of course, for non-citizens to vote in this country, and there's no evidence of that happening in large numbers. Republicans say the problem is it's not tracked well enough, but there really is not that evidence. As for mass deportations, it isn't clear exactly how that would work. Trump has indicated that he would have a national dragnet to find undocumented immigrants, perhaps beginning with those who they know are criminals, but how would he find them? It's unclear. I spoke with Jenny Murray of the center-right National Immigration Forum about concerns.
It's extremely problematic, and it's problematic to all folks across the country. What we're finding is, over 75% of Americans do not support that type of an approach. Whether you are conservative or progressive, you likely work alongside someone who might be removed.
Maria is someone who pays attention to business concerns and say that kind of dragnet could be a problem for the economy, as I think Laura's reported before. Now, this is only one of Donald Trump's ideas that I think it's important to highlight, not his only enforcement push. Now, Trump also wants to narrowly scale back asylum and access to asylum in this country to the degree where it might essentially be closed to most people who seek it. He also would end refugee resettlement in this country. His key advisor, Stephen Miller, says Trump also wants to end DACA. As our viewers and you know, that's the program for those who were brought here as children, sometimes called Dreamers. Trump has gone back and forth on this program, but his key immigration advisor says he wants to end it.
So that's the proposals you pulled together from former President Trump. What about Vice President Harris? What are her plans both for undocumented immigrants and also for asylum?
Harris has not issued yet a comprehensive immigration plan, but she has said a lot about what she wants to do. She is opposed to mass deportations, but she has moved to the right otherwise on this issue. In 2019, candidate Harris, running for president, then said she thought it should be decriminalized, that people crossing the border, it should not be a criminal offense, but a civil offense. Now, in the debate just this week, she said instead that it should be an enforced part of law. So let's look at exactly what she says she would do. She says that the border needs to be enforced, that she would make asylum harder, but not as difficult as former President Trump. She also supports refugee resettlement, and she would support a path to citizenship for DACA. Those on the right say that her ideas fall short of solving the problem.
The Senate bill shows that it does not accomplish really anything in terms of border security or immigration reform. But as I said, politically, it's a pretty handy cudgel. It actually makes the situation worse. It would lock in about 2 million illegal crossers a year who would be added to the pile in this sort of limbo that is our immigration asylum processing system.
Now, the numbers he mentions assumes this unprecedented level of migration we have now. We know it's not limited to America. There is a global migration surge right now.
Okay, so this is what they're proposing as candidates, right? You've also been digging into their records, what they've actually done. What does that show?
A couple things. As president, Donald Trump oversaw 52 miles of new primary border fencing. He also pushed for a ban on Muslims entering this country. That was rejected by courts, but he says he still wants to ban many people coming from Muslim countries. A note on his rhetoric, though. As William in this chair last night pointed out, the words from the Trump and Vance campaign often dehumanize immigrants. Now, as for Harris, she was appointed to oversee root causes of migration. Republicans say she was in charge of the border. No, this was about 3 countries in Central America. She did secure $9 billion in aid to help address those root causes of migration. Her campaign says also that she hasn't been to the border since 2021. In part, they say she is about substance, not about show. Regardless, Amna, both of these candidates, I think, are going to have to talk more about this issue in the next few months.
It's a big issue this election year. Lisa Desjardins, thank you so much.
Welcome.
The International Criminal Court at The Hague investigates and, as warranted, tries people charged with the gravest of crimes. These days, its prosecutor is busy focusing on the war in Ukraine and the war between Israel and Hamas. Earlier today, Nick Schifrin spoke with the court's lead prosecutor.
Karim Khan is on a trip to Ukraine visiting a children's hospital destroyed by a missile strike. speaking to victims of alleged crimes committed in detention facilities, and held an event with Ukraine's First Lady decrying Russian war crimes against Ukrainian children. ICC prosecutor Karim Khan joins us from Kyiv. Thanks very much. Welcome back to the NewsHour. I just listed what you've been doing in Ukraine. Are you seeing ongoing war crimes committed by the Russian Federation?
We think so. Clearly, a lot to investigate. Civilians that are being killed, a lot of civilian objects that are being targeted. You mentioned in the introduction the visit to the Okhmyt Children's Hospital. And on the 8th of July, a cruise missile from the Russian Federation, an X-101, hit it. The suffering is horrendous. The heartbreak is very real. And we see so many examples of objects that are civilian, not military, being destroyed and civilians being killed. And these are areas why we're here.
That attack, of course, is just one of many. Since your first indictment of Vladimir Putin in March 2023, are you planning to amend your indictment to incorporate what appears to be a vast number of ongoing additional war crimes perpetrated in Ukraine, presumably with the authorization of Mr. Putin?
Well, investigations are organic. We are going to keep on going as with determination to investigate the various crimes that seem to have been committed in an ongoing campaign, not only against the Ukrainian military, born from the acts of aggression, but also causing so much loss to innocent civilian life. We're trying to build partnerships so that wherever it is in the world, there's more space for accountability, less space for impunity, and all the levers of justice must be used.
Vladimir Putin recently visited Mongolia, a state party to the International Criminal Court, but Mongolia ignored the arrest warrant for Mr. Putin. Do you believe Mongolia obstructed justice?
Well, there's a process. The judges are looking into this. The judges have a process to inquire and, if necessary, report any state party for non-cooperation. It's very unfortunate Mongolia didn't execute a judicial order, but this is the first time since warrants were issued that President Putin has put his feet on the territory of a state party to their own statute. I hope it's the exception and not the norm.
But experts I speak to say it was almost inevitable that Putin would visit a state party to the ICC. Does Mongolia's decision erode the court's effectiveness, and does it give you pause that you made the indictment public?
It doesn't give me pause at all. There's a diminishing space for tyrants, for fugitives, for individuals who feel that their power give them immunity. Shouldn't be so sanguine.
You do not have jurisdiction over the crime of aggression at the ICC, but Ukraine is becoming a state party to the ICC, and once they are a member, they're prohibited from committing aggression. So do you believe that could trigger a problem, given Ukraine's incursion into Russia in the Kursk province, or do you believe that is an act of self-defense?
Well, I'm not going to speak in abstract, but every state that is attacked has an international law right, is there in the Charter, to defend itself. Countries are not expected to lie down and be assaulted. In fact, not only the right, very often there's a responsibility to defend statehood, constitutions, territory, and people.
I want to switch to Israel and Gaza. In May, you requested warrants for the arrest of 3 Hamas leaders, including Chief Yahya Sinwar, as well as for Israeli Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu and Defense Minister Yoav Gallant. This week, you called on the ICC's judges to issue those arrest warrants, quote, with utmost urgency. Why?
Look, Nick, this morning I woke up. In Gaza, there was a school being used to house 15,000 people taking shelter, civilians. It's a designated location. Secretary General noted more than 30 civilians have been killed. 6 UN staff have been killed. We're seeing baby after baby destroyed. Pregnant women giving birth, stillbirth to children. We see, of course, Israelis that are still hostages. Kafir Bibas was 10 months old when he was so cruelly taken from the kibbutzim. Those families waiting for their loved ones in Israel have a right to justice. And Sinwar is subject to our application, and the people of Palestine, people in Gaza, who want to have food and water, who want to stop waking up in terror as bombs land and the earth shakes and no place is safe, it seems, including schools, as the Secretary General has mentioned today. If we don't start supporting the architecture built in the aftermath of the horrors of the Second World War, we're going to get the Wild West in which no political decisions will help and in which people will be emboldened to just do what they want and not care for our children.
Mr. Prosecutor, this week, Benjamin Netanyahu, the Prime Minister of Israel, released this statement, quote, "The comparison made by the prosecutor in The Hague between the Prime Minister and Defense Minister of Israel, which is fighting numerous Hamas terrorism in accordance with the laws of war, and the war criminal Yahya Sinwar, who executed Israeli hostages in cold blood, is pure anti-Semitism and a moral disgrace of the highest order." What's your response to that?
Look, this is a trope that is bandied around with abandon, even when it's not only repugnant and completely false. But in my particular case, I mean, the record shows who I am. I was very honored last year to be invited to give the second Elie Wiesel Memorial Lecture. They wouldn't have invited an anti-Semite to give such a message. Nobody is above the law, nobody's beneath the law. The best of Judaism, the best of Israel is complies with the law. Instead of polemics, instead of trying to discredit individuals, people should submit to the law, make their case. If it's frivolous, if the case is a tissue of lies, judges have shown repeatedly that they will acquit individuals or throw cases out.
Two of the Hamas officials that you've indicted, Mohammed Deif, the head of the military wing, and Ismail Haniyeh, the head of the political wing, have both been killed. Do you consider that justice?
Hamas, of course, is a proscribed organization in many countries. I don't shed a tear for individuals. What I do say is that there is a utility to the application of the law. But of course, the law is operating in a space in which there are legitimate military targets and there are military operations underway. I won't speak beyond that because there is a conflict. But the law has utility, and I'm very much in favor of the equal application of the law.
A week and a half ago, the U.S. and Israel said that Hamas guards holding Israeli hostages taken on October the 7th executed those hostages in a tunnel underneath Gaza. Hamas also continues to use rockets to fire against civilian targets in Israel. Are you continuing to investigate Hamas actions, and do you believe those actions are war crimes?
Absolutely. Every individual must comply with the law. We have jurisdiction over the territory of Palestine. It's abhorrent. As long as we have jurisdiction, we'll try our best to make sure that the arc bends towards legality. Nobody should feel that they can do whatever they want.
ICC Prosecutor Karim Khan, thank you very much.
The CEO of the nation's largest private for-profit hospital chain is under fire for ignoring a subpoena to testify before the Senate today. The hearing looked at the financial collapse of Steward Health Care. That's a hospital group created by a private equity firm, generated huge fortunes for its investors and its CEO, but left patients in dangerous, sometimes deadly conditions. William Brangham has the story.
Jeff, Steward's Healthcare CEO, Dr. Ralph de la Torre, skipped today's hearing where he would have been questioned about his role in the bankruptcy of this nationwide hospital chain. According to an investigation by the Boston Globe, Steward Health's 30-plus hospitals were some of the worst in the nation. 6 of its remaining hospitals in Massachusetts are for sale, and 2 others have closed. Several witnesses who worked for Steward provided damning testimony today about the role that corporate profits played in Steward's downfall. That included a nurse who described one example of how the chain's habit of not paying vendors created horrible circumstances for grieving parents.
Sadly enough, sometimes babies die, newborn babies die, and the practice is to place the baby's remains in a bereavement box and take it to the morgue. Steward didn't pay the vendor, and there weren't any bereavement boxes. And nurses were forced to put babies' remains in cardboard shipping boxes.
For more on the downfall of this hospital chain, I'm joined by Mark Arsenal. He's part of the Boston Globe Spotlight investigative team that did this series. Mark, thank you so much. Just a tremendous investigation that you have done here. Before we get into the details of how patient care suffered at these hospitals, can you sort of explain the sort of basic architecture of Steward Healthcare, how it was started? What is it?
Yeah, Steward Healthcare was founded in Boston in 2010 when a private equity firm known as Cerberus Capital Management bought 6 hospitals, struggling community hospitals from the Boston Catholic Archdiocese. Stewart then went on quite a buying spree with a real goal to try to get bigger and ended up with more than 40 properties at its peak. It did what we were calling a chain defining deal in 2016 with a real estate investment trust from Alabama, whereby Stewart sold a lot of the property, sort of the land in the buildings under its own hospitals, and then leased them back, which generated a bunch of money for Stewart, more than $1 billion, most of which went to dividends, not into hospital reinvestment, but also straddled these community hospitals with significant rent and lease payments.
Your investigation details this remarkable duality where investors get incredibly rich, the CEO has got 2 yachts, while patient care at their hospitals suffer because of incredible stinginess. Can you describe some of what your team calls the human cost of financial neglect?
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, I think there were sort of 2 categories where Steward really harmed its hospitals. The one was just the failure to pay for enough staffing. And this is not just nurses, but also doctors and certain specialists. And the other category would be failure to pay for oftentimes routine equipment, supplies, maintenance on machines, and even maintenance on buildings. For example, if you don't have wires for pacemakers, then patients who need that procedure have to have it delayed. If you don't have biopsy needles, as that was one of the shortages that we documented, then certain vital cancer detecting tests are delayed in an area of medicine where early detection is everything. The team found 15 cases in which a person died after receiving care in a Steward hospital that did not meet professionally accepted standards due to a lack of staff or a lack of supplies and equipment.
One of the most harrowing stories is a story about a man named Gilberto Melendez Brancasio, who was taken to a Steward hospital when he was having a psychiatric break. Can you tell us a little bit about his experience?
Yeah, Gilberto, this was a hard case. Young guy, 31 years old, beloved uncle, beloved nephew, had some mental health problems that normally would be managed with medication. He didn't always take it because he didn't like how the medication made him feel sometimes. He had a bit of a psychological break. The police did the reasonable thing and brought him to Kearney Hospital in Dorchester, Massachusetts, a Steward hospital. He was restrained in the emergency department, chemically and physically restrained. He was also having some respiratory issues, and the doctors ordered that he not be left alone, that Gilberto needed one-on-one monitoring continuously. Unfortunately, the hospital didn't have the people for one-on-one monitoring, and he was left alone. So when his heart stopped, there was nobody there to help him. There was nobody there to resuscitate him, nobody there to raise an alarm. And 19 hours after he entered a Steward hospital, they wheeled his body to the morgue.
Some legislators have argued that this circumstance ought to make us rethink the role that private equity plays in hospital management. And they've proposed some legislative guardrails. Can you explain sort of what's on the table there?
Well, I mean, number one, we heard it today in the Senate hearing where people just asked for just a ban or with certain legislation that would require in private equity hospitals or in all hospitals, sort of minimum staffing requirements, minimum equipment requirements. Just we heard it today before the Senate committee, nurses just saying that we just can't let other hospital chains like Steward leave nurses and doctors shorthanded or without the tools they need to do the jobs.
All right, Mark Arsenal of the Boston Globe, a tremendous piece of reporting. Thank you so much for speaking with us.
Right on. Thank you, William.
For decades, producer Dan Slepian has spearheaded documentaries, podcasts, and investigative reports for the news magazine show Dateline NBC. In 2002, a chance conversation propelled him to start probing wrongful convictions, work he's continued for more than 20 years. His new book, The Sing Sing Files, is out now, and we sat down recently to talk about why this one issue continues to fuel his work.
You know, everybody thinks they know how the justice system works. I grew up believing that the justice system worked just the way it should as a kid in Westchester County, middle-class kid. And I had a unique perspective as a Dateline producer. And with that perspective, I was able to see a justice system that I never knew existed, a very dark and ugly underbelly that is really how the system often works.
Well, let me ask you about your entry into that world, because there's this one case in particular, sort of infamous New York case called the Palladium murder back in 1990. There was a nightclub bouncer who was shot and killed on Thanksgiving Day. 2 men are convicted and sentenced to 25 years to life for that murder. You called that whole case your window into this world, into the dark side of the justice system. Why?
It was my baptism. I was out to dinner one night with a detective who I was shadowing a couple of weeks into our project, and I said, "You must bring this job home with you, everything you see." And he says, "I really don't, except this one case has been bothering me." I'm like, "What's that about?" And he said that he knew that these 2 men, David Lemus and Almeida Hidalgo, were innocent of the murder at the Palladium nightclub on Thanksgiving night, 1990. And I said, "How do you know?"
Yeah.
Just because I know who really committed the crime. And so I ended up investigating that case. I find the real killer. I get him to Rockefeller Center. He basically confesses on tape. The innocent guy spent 15 years in prison. And eventually, after we aired a show back then, the judge overturned the conviction in 2005. And to this day, not only has the Manhattan District Attorney's Office never admitted they were wrong, they retried the innocent guy. So from that perspective, I couldn't believe that people who are guardians of the system, who took an oath to do the right thing, couldn't fix an obvious, tragic miscarriage of justice.
And that one case has fueled so many cases you've investigated since then. You tell the stories of many men in this book, but as you acknowledge, there's one man, J.J. Velasquez, who you say is the soul of this book. Why is that? Tell us.
He actually shared a wall, a cement wall. He was in the cell next to the guy that I was doing a story about. And so JJ wrote me a letter in 2002, and there was something about JJ's letters that really pulled me in. There was something about his persistence, his eloquence.
As a result of your work, years of that kind of work, you get to be there at those moments, like when JJ is released, right? And he walks out of prison and he walks into the arms of his waiting family, his weeping mother. After the years that you've spent knowing this person is innocent, helping to fight for them to get out, what's that moment like?
I obviously was thrilled for JJ. JJ should never have been arrested 27 years ago. I had proven his innocence. He was as innocent as he was alive. I mean, I did a story about him in 2012, and he spent another decade in prison because of what the Manhattan DA's office did. So when he got out, I felt joy for him, but I was not as happy as I thought I was going to be. And it's not because he wasn't out, it was because I saw it as something of a failure. I felt guilt that I knew the truth for so long, and it speaks volumes about the system that that's what it took. If it took this to get him out, God help everybody behind him. It's the tip of the iceberg. This is a hidden epidemic. This is a national crisis There's only been 3,300 people in more than 30 years that have been exonerated in this country. The most conservative estimates say there's at least 100,000 innocent people right now as you and I are sitting here. And people go about their life as if it's normal.
Sounds like you're still working on these stories. There are many more
I'll
to be
never
told.
stop working on these stories. It's embedded in my DNA. It is my responsibility. I don't have hobbies. I don't sleep very much. I get contacted all of the time by people. And too many of those claims are true.
The stories you document are so powerful, and I know your work on this continues. The book is The Sing Sing Files: One Journalist, Six Innocent Men, and a 20-Year Fight for Justice. The author is Dan Slepian. Dan, thank you for being here.
I so appreciate you having me, Amna. Thank you.
Beauty and Rebirth in Decay. It's a vision of urban exploration, restoration, and development now underway across Northwest Indiana. Jeffrey Brown reports for our Arts and Culture series, Canvas.
It's an American ruin, the once grand, long-abandoned City Methodist Church in Gary, Indiana. Extraordinary details still hidden in plain sight everywhere.
It's still beautiful.
Oh, look at that window. Wow. Even as the roofless structure itself barely offers cover from the pouring rain. Our guides, Gary natives Terrell Anderson and Lori Gonzalez, urban explorers who've been visiting buildings like this for more than a decade, taking photographs and, crucially, documenting the history.
There's still beauty in destruction. Like if you see all these different beautiful things, you can imagine what it used to look like in its heyday.
You know that it's not going to be a church as though it once was, but how can you beautify any aspect of it to tell the history side of it?
A history that for this church dates to 1926, with decades as a segregated whites-only congregation before eventually closing its doors in 1975.
They refused to integrate, so when people began to move out, their congregation numbers dwindled.
It's in some ways a microcosm of Gary's history, an industrial city that lost more than half its population since the 1960s, driven by fewer steel jobs and white flight. Today, there are some 10,000 abandoned buildings throughout the city, including Union Station, making Gary something of a mecca for people like Lori and Terrell, who are drawn to urbex, or urban exploration. I saw in the back of your sweatshirt, it says, "I play in abandoned buildings." So this began sort of as a kind of play?
Yeah. Like, get your camera, jump in the car, rent a car, and just go.
More than a decade ago, Lori and Terrell became the backbone of an informal group that called themselves Decay Devils, traveling to cities like Detroit and far beyond to explore and photograph abandoned structures.
It kind of morphed from just buildings because it was like, well, these places kind of have a bad rap. Well, let's go and learn more about the people, and then the cuisine, and then everything else. And it was like,
and the history.
Oh, these people are like really cool people. And so it actually helped us like kind of pivot from just going to take pictures and eating to, okay, tell us how y'all did this, and where'd you get the money from, and how'd you bring this together?
In 2015, Decay Devils became a formal nonprofit, now focused on preserving and even restoring structures in and around Gary. Its first project, this train station, built with steel-reinforced concrete in 1910, just 4 years after the city was founded. The station closed in the early 70s, and after decades of neglect, Decay Devils acquired it in 2018 for just $10.
These tunnels actually used to lead to boarding platforms.
Yeah. They've spent years volunteering and raising money to get the outside and inside of the station mostly cleared out.
When I first saw it cleaned out, I was like, I could do cartwheels. Like, it was so clear from not being able to walk in safely and then seeing it now.
It is safe to be in here?
No.
Not safe.
We should be wearing some hard hats.
The group estimates it will cost at least $6 million to make the space functional. The hope to turn it into a visitor center with a cafe and space for local vendors and artists.
You're looking at well over 20,000 people traversing this area a day. Let's make this a place that they need to stop.
Selling a vision for an abandoned building in a city where the percentage of people in poverty is nearly 3 times higher than the national rate is an uphill battle.
This church was designed by a modernist architect.
But Eunice Trotter, who heads the Black History Preservation Program of the private nonprofit Indiana Landmarks, says efforts in cities like Gary are crucial.
As the buildings are erased, so does the history follow. It becomes less and less known.
We sat down with Trotter at St. Augustine's Episcopal Church, a historically black congregation with a meticulously maintained building that's received support from Indiana Landmarks.
What you see when you drive around Gary, the many abandoned sites, is the result of disinvestment. Gary is just the best example of the need for Black heritage preservation.
Trotter points to another large building in Gary under threat, also with a rich history for the city's black community. Built in 1930 as one of 3 high schools in the state for black students during segregation, Gary Roosevelt High School housed more than 3,000 students at its peak, a hub of Gary's black middle class. But after shrinking enrollment and decades of deferred maintenance, a failing heat system caused pipes to burst in 2019. It's been vacant since then.
Here, a very rich culture was built on black excellence and professionalism. And that's what this school really stands for. We actually had a fairly good swim team.
Marlon Mitchell graduated from Gary Roosevelt in 1989. He now heads a local economic development corporation that's partnered with Indiana Landmarks to explore other uses for the school.
We knew that it wasn't going to be a school anymore. The population couldn't support that. But Roosevelt as a school, as an institution, meant so much to the community that the community should decide what happens to this building.
In May, the National Trust for Historic Preservation named Gary Roosevelt one of America's 11 most endangered historic places.
This building has much more life left if we breathe into it.
We can use some of that space for museum space. We could use some of that space for a hotel, for an event center, for artists, and on and on. That's a site that has many, many more years of life with a little love. And that love is at the tune of $20 million.
$20 million, which is a lot of money in a place like Gary, where there are a lot of other needs.
There is a lot of money. But we believe that restoring that school will ignite tremendous restoration for Gary.
And that's the goal for Terrell, Lori, and Decay Devils as well, turning their efforts from just play to rebirth and development of their city through reimagining these buildings.
The city has a lot more to offer. It's a huge city. I mean, your main thoroughfare might have some abandonment around it. You just automatically assume that that's what it's going to be when you go into like the neighborhoods, and that's not the case.
Like, there's people that live here. We're not a ghost town.
Terrell looks to a world-famous model of what can happen with ruins.
We don't really think about it, but that's what the Coliseum is. You get to walk around and look.
Yeah, it's a ruin.
And that's it, it's a ruin, but we know that there is an energy here. It's just along the lines of how do you properly monetize it and use it to help other things be developed.
It's a grand dream, now a challenge for Decay Devils and the boosters of Gary's historic buildings. For the PBS NewsHour, I'm Jeffrey Brown inside the ruins of City Methodist Church in Gary, Indiana.
And that is the NewsHour for tonight. I'm Amna Nawaz.
And I'm Jeff Bennett. Thanks for joining us.
Major funding for the PBS NewsHour has been provided by
moving our economy for 160 years. BNSF, the engine that connects us.
The ongoing support of these individuals and institutions. And friends of the NewsHour, including Leonard and Norma Chlorfine and the Judy and Peter Bloom Kovler Foundation. The Ford Foundation, working with visionaries on the front lines of social change worldwide. And with the ongoing support of these institutions. And friends of the NewsHour. This program was made possible by the Corporation for Public Broadcasting and by contributions to your PBS station from viewers like you. Thank you.
You're watching PBS.